Hi guys, welcome to another episode of US History with Lennox, and today we're going to talk about the war that ended all wars. Well, not really, but that's what they referred to it as once it was all said and done. I'm of course talking about World War I, and though we know it's not the war that ended all wars, we also know that this war affected history throughout the 20th century and really still does today. Now, when we look at America from 1914 to 1945, we are looking at one of the most tumultuous times of American history. Think about it for a second. We're slowly coming out of the progressive era when we started looking at the role of government and its relationship with society completely differently. We're also just stepping onto the world stage as a power because we're starting to imperialize in different regions of the world. We're about to hit one of the worst economic depressions of all time, and it all ends with yet another world war. But first we got to understand this war. So let's get into World War I and really look at how it all started. Not only are we going to answer that question in this video, in future videos I'm also going to look at why neutrality for America was so difficult. We really tried to stay out of this war, and we were successful for a short period of time, but we're eventually going to get pulled in. And then also, why did we choose the side we went on? Why did we enter on the Allied side and not the Central Power side? Because when you look at it, it could have gone either way. Let's focus this video on what started this mess. And the way you remember that is to remember Maine. The main causes of World War I, you see how I played on the word there? Yeah. The main causes of World War I are going to be militarism, alliances, imperialism, and finally, nationalism. Now let's look at militarism first. This is more than just building up a military. You had a lot of competition in Europe at this time. In fact, there was an arms race that was occurring between Great Britain and Germany. And the whole idea was to stockpile weapons for war. Everyone was doing it. I think the idea behind it is the stronger our military is, the less probable that someone will attack us. And if you look at the militaries of Europe going into the 19-teens, they all had their strengths and they all had their weaknesses. And militarism was an attempt to overcome those weaknesses. For example, Great Britain had the largest navy in the world, but a very small army. Were they to get involved in a war, if it was on the seas, they're golden. But if it was a continental war on land, not so much. Russia and Austria-Hungary, huge armies, but very inefficient. And then finally, France and Germany had small armies, but very strong armies. So the idea of militarism throughout Europe was this idea of trying to level the battlefield, if you will, where the weaknesses started to slowly dissipate. It didn't hurt that we're coming out of the Industrial Revolution where new technologies with weaponry are being introduced, and it's going to completely change the face of war going forward. The next major cause of this war is going to be alliances. Now, an alliance is when two states come together and reach an agreement for the mutual self-defense of one another. Basically, when two countries say, hey, I got your back if anybody gives you a hard time. Well, there were a lot of alliances that had been developing in Europe during this time, and they were kind of complex. So let's look at some of these. Let's start with Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. These two countries were natural allies, and it was based on their language families. They spoke the same language, basically. The same could be said for Russia and Serbia. These were both Slavic-based languages. Now, not all alliances were built on language. Some were built on fear. For example, Germany and the Ottoman Empire, also known as Turkey, they formed an alliance because, well, they were afraid of Russia. Another alliance that was built was between France and Russia. This alliance was built due to the fallout from the Franco-Prussian Wars and France and Germany just not liking each other. And if Germany doesn't like Russia, well, France says, I kind of like you. And then finally, Great Britain sitting over there kind of on their own saying, well, we've had this arms race with Germany going on for a while, so we're going to go ahead and ally ourselves with France and Russia. Did you get all that? Well, if not, let me break it down a little simpler for you. Austria-Hungary, Germany, friends. Serbia and Russia, friends. Turkey and Germany, not friends, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because Russia was their enemy, they're friends. And then finally, France and Russia are friends against Germany. Got it? Piece of cake, right? Imperialism is going to play a role in World War I. Now, imperialism is when one country brings another country under its political and sometimes economic influence. And we see this happening globally. And it's a competition between all the major countries of the world, including the United States. The final cause of World War I is going to be nationalism. Nationalism is when one identifies with their country and the people of their country, often to the exclusion of others. Now, don't confuse nationalism with patriotism. Patriotism is when one has a love of its country and its people, but there's no exclusion of others. Nationalism says it's about us and only us. When you look at what was going on in Europe, we had been maintaining this delicate balance of peace for a while. Looking at the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, they're what's known as a polyglot empire, which means a lot of different language families exist within their empire. In fact, there were 55 million people who lived in Austria-Hungary, and of those 55 million, 11 major languages spoken. Some of those languages were Slavic-based. Well, why is that important? Well, if you remember correctly, Serbia and Russia are allies because of their Slavic-based language. It's almost a Slavic brotherhood, if you will. And a lot of the cultures in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire identified more with the Slavics than they did with the Austrian-Hungarians. When you look at a map of the region, Serbia was this tiny little country south of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but it had a lot of ties right across the border, specifically Bosnia. Serbia had gained its independence in 1912 and wanted to see Bosnia join them in their independence, but Austria-Hungary was having none of that. What's going to really ignite this entire war is going to be the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, he was the heir apparent to the crown of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. He's going to be the next dude in charge. Well, what's going to happen is he is going to travel to Sarajevo. And while there, he is going to be assassinated by this man here, Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand terrorist group. The Black Hand was attempting, through this assassination, to bring Bosnia into independence with Serbia. That's not going to be what happens. Instead, it's going to launch a war. When this happens, Austria-Hungary is going to demand that Serbia turn over the killers of the Archduke. 10 different times they're going to demand it, but they're going to set these demands up where Serbia has no way to answer. So what's going to end up happening is Austria-Hungary is going to declare war on Serbia in retaliation for the assassination of the Archduke. Well, when that happens, Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary because you just declared war on my Slavic brother. You can't do that, so I'm going to declare war on you. Then when that happens, Germany says, wait a minute, you just declared war on our ally, and because of our alliance, we're going to declare war on you. And then on top of that, France declares war on Germany because Germany declared war on Russia, and then Germany in exchange is going to turn and declare war on France. At the same time, Germany, expecting France to get involved in this war, is going to invade Belgium, which is right across the channel from Great Britain. Because of that, Great Britain declares war on Germany. And World War I is underway. Crazy, isn't it? So let me break this down for you. June 28th, the Archduke and his wife are going to be assassinated by a Serbian terrorist. On July 23rd, Austria-Hungary sends an ultimatum to Serbia. When they don't respond, they declare war on Serbia on July 28th. July 29th is when Russia starts to mobilize its troops towards the Austrian-Hungarian border. As a result, Germany sends an ultimatum to Russia, says, stop, don't do that. And when they didn't stop, Germany declares war on Russia. After that happens, knowing that France is friends with Russia, Germany declares war on France and invades Belgium. France is going to declare war on Germany, and Great Britain, because of the invasion of Belgium, is going to declare war on Germany. So who's at fault? Who started this war? There's not an easy answer. But what we know is this war is going to have some devastating effects on the world itself. One of the major battles that I will touch on, and I don't touch on a lot of battles, is the Battle of the Somme. Up until 1916, the first 2 years of the war, it was a stalemate. No one was winning. Now, the Allies are going to attempt to change this with an all-out battle in July of 1916. See, the Germans had dug themselves in on what was the other side of no man's land, that land between the Allies and the Central Powers. And what the Allies are going to do at this point is just start bombing them like crazy. Nearly 1.5 million rounds of cannon fire are going to be dropped on the Germans on that other side of no man's land. The idea was, we're just going to push them into submission. We're going to break their spirit. The idea was they were hoping they would give up, but that's not what happened. After the first day of the battle, 20,000 men were killed. This battle will last 4 months, and at the end of that 4 months, there was 1.1 million casualties. The machine gun will be the primary weapon used during this battle, and it inflicted so much destruction that people really said, is this land really worth it? I mean, it's a fair question. What's going to happen, though, because of the incredible death from this one battle? The Battle of the Somme is going to be known as taking away the flower of Europe. Almost an entire generation of European men is going to be wiped out, not only by this battle, but all of World War I. The cost is very high, and we have to ask, what were we fighting for? Keep in mind, the United States hasn't even gotten involved in this war. We just touched on how it got started. My next video, we're going to look at how the U.S. got involved and what their impact will be. If you missed anything, you can always go back and watch it again. I appreciate your attention on this one as usual. If you can subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Other than that, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.